Hello APUSH Nation, Mr. Zagari here from Governors Island, New York, just off the coast of Manhattan, between the borough of Brooklyn, south of Manhattan, and to my west, New Jersey. And yes, that is Lady Liberty over my shoulder there. Where is she? There she is. There you can see her in the backdrop, which was dedicated in 1886 as a gift from the French. So, what we're looking at today is the historical importance of Governors Island throughout American history and how the island truly represents the changes that have happened culturally, politically, economically to our nation from its birth in 1776 all the way to present day. So, Governors Island, and welcome to APUSH on the Road. So Governors Island represents and gets its start with our history with the Lenape Indians that inhabited this territory. And historically speaking, historians are not really sure if there was actual Lenape settlements here or if it was mostly used for hunting grounds because of its rich natural resources such as the various native oak trees that were here. But the Lenape were the first to utilize this island, and then we have Dutch when they settled here in the 17th century, and then the takeover from New Amsterdam into a British colony in 1664. So the Lenape Indians were the first indigenous group that used the island for its natural resources. Okay, here we have one of the battery emplacements on Governors Island, Fort J, and these battery emplacements were put here during the American Revolution as part of the fortification of New York Harbor by the Continental Army. Israel Putnam, who was commissioned to build these fortifications. These are called redoubts, earthworks, and the only time with the military history of this island, the only time these cannons were ever fired in anger was during the Battle of Brooklyn. And what we see here is that the HMS Phoenix was steaming, well not steaming, but coming north up the Hudson River, and these cannons opened fire on her. Remember, this was the largest invasion in world history prior to D-Day, was the British invasion of New York. And these cannons opened fire on the HMS Phoenix, and she kept moving north up the Hudson River, and it was part of the evacuation process of the Battle of Brooklyn. So what we see here is that if these cannons did not fire, and they didn't hit anything, but just to distract the British stayed away from Long Island with their ships. They amassed troops on there and cornered Washington into the East River area by Brooklyn Heights. But what these cannons did was keeping those ships away, it allowed Washington another piece of the puzzle on the escape, the retreat, which allowed Washington then to cross over into Manhattan, move up Manhattan, and within a month cross over into New Jersey and then down into Trenton. So these redoubts were built as part of the fortification process of New York. Everyone knew that New York was the target, both Britain and the United States. So even after the American Revolution, they refortified New York after the British evacuated, and they built within the New York City area, including Long Island Sound, the Hudson River, and even out to Sandy Hook, New Jersey. We roughly have 8 to 10 battery emplacements that were used to deter the British. And when the British came this way in 1814, during the War of 1812, they saw the battery emplacements and turned away. So this is part of Fort. Okay, APUSH Nation, very apropos here for the Royal Navy Harbor. And here we have in that backdrop there, in between New York and New Jersey, from Governors Island here, the view, is the HMS Richmond. And she is a frigate as part of the Royal Navy fleet. And if we were sitting on this ground over 240 years ago, there would be cannons pointed at any British vessel coming into the harbor. Clearly our relationship, our policy with the British has changed tremendously. We are the closest of allies. We share a lot of the same culture and ideals with our cousins across the pond, so to speak. But here we have the HMS Richmond steaming north. Is she going to the Tappan Zee? Is she going that north up the river? Probably not, but her sailors are manning the rails, and which is a show of peace. I know it's hard to see in this video, but if in the 1770s the HMS Phoenix was the ship of the line, that right there, the HMS Queen Elizabeth, is the ship of the line for the modern Royal Navy, and it's the largest of the British aircraft carriers here in New York Harbor. The British are coming. Now, with the rich military history of this fort, we also see that, or this island I should say, we see that Robert Moses wanted to build a bridge over Manhattan from Long Island, Brooklyn, Governors Island, Manhattan. They opted instead of building the Battery Tunnel, but during this time period of the 1930s, we see that many of these buildings that were used as barracks during World War I are now being redeveloped as part of the WPA. And the WPA was one of Franklin Roosevelt's, FDR's, one of his alphabet soup agencies in the New Deal to put Americans back to work. So here we have the WPA on Governors Island. Again, representing the changing of America. Okay, Push Nation, here we have One World Trade right here. And I was just showing my kids that this is the spot where 9/11 occurred. That is where Ground Zero was, and clearly 21 years later we have rebuilt, but definitely hallowed ground right there. But showing my children where that awful event happened was some pretty intense history. So to recap, what do we see here on Governors Island? How it really does represent the changing times, the changing tides of American history. We see politically everything from the Continental Independence movement in the 1770s to the end of the Cold War with Reagan and Gorbachev meeting here. Militarily, which was much of the history of this island, we see pretty much every war up until Vietnam represented here. Economically, we see the New Deal alive and well and trying to put Americans back on their feet again during the Great Depression. Socially, we see Native American history. We see this revitalization program that's going on now with various entertainment and open park space for people to come and gather and enjoy the natural environment of New York City. Naturally speaking, we also see a revitalization of the native plants that once inhabited this island, where originally what the Lenape called Nut Island because of the oak trees and the different types of native plants that were utilized. We see that coming back. We also see the modernization and the trends that are coming in American history with different types of entertainment and sporting events here on the island, even the food trucks and areas of the island that were once used as military barracks are used now for glamping. So you could rent a tent here for $500 to $1,000 a night and have the most beautiful vistas of New York Harbor. And this is all just a few hundred yards off the southern tip of Manhattan, and it really does represent America as a whole. This is Mr. Zagari. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy our segments on APUSH on the road. Stay tuned, we have more coming for you. Enjoy the day.